Hello and welcome to another podcast of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky, here with Father Boniface Hicks. And today, Father, this is just a thought that I had been having for a while. And I wanted to kind of use this space to discuss it. And it is so often what we have from companies in society that are trying to do something good. They will attempt to do whatever good works it is, promote a value or a code of ethics, but almost universally they take God out of it, almost as if they just don't want to say God or Jesus or whatever. And I wanted to basically have that discussion because obviously on the one hand, they're attempting to create a better culture in their workplace for lots of reasons. Living a Christian life is better for society as a whole. And so as a result, there's going to be some underlying overlap. But the part that I wanted to discuss here was the danger of removing the acknowledgement of God out of the picture. And that was the starting point with where I wanted to take the day's direction and go from there.
Yeah, it's a great observation. And I remember a friend of mine was working as a manager for, one of these big kind of nationwide chains and was telling me about a lot of the virtues that they were promoting for the managers to then pass on to the employees. And my friend is a very devout Catholic, and so he could recognize the virtue ethics that were being promoted, and it was everything except for the name of Christ, as you're pointing out, Joe. And so on the one hand, that's great. It's great that a system of virtues that is really inspired by Christ and thus also going to be the one that kind of contains the fullness of truth is being promoted. On the other hand, as you say, what happens when you remove the name of Christ? Because that's not just a name. It's not just like, we didn't give proper credit to the trademark owner or, the copyright owner of the material. We can't really do it without him. So that's, I was just thinking recently as I was reading through Scripture, a number of different things that we've run into in the daily Mass readings and the Liturgy of the Hours. There are a number of Old Testament figures who start out well and end up badly.
Yeah.
And illustrious people, even like Moses, who obviously started out well, but then didn't enter the Promised Land because he failed significantly along the way, and so brought him all the way up to the threshold, but God didn't let him enter in. Or you can look at someone like King Saul, who we're hearing about in I guess that's the Office of Readings primarily now, and King Saul, who was the anointed one. He was the chosen one of the Lord. He was raised up from the small tribe of Benjamin and made the great king, but then he fell prey to jealousy over David, and he didn't carry out the Lord's command, and he kept hold of idols, and he kind of hedged his bets in different ways, and he ends up a total disaster. David himself, who starts out great, is the anointed one, the chosen, raised up from the tribe of Jesse, and the family of Jesse, and defeats Goliath and becomes the great hero king, and then kind of dissolves in a variety of ways, falls into adultery with Bathsheba and kills her husband Uriah, and gets involved in all kind of clan family warfare. His son Solomon, the same thing, the great king of wisdom, and he has the appreciation. People come from all over the earth. He builds the temple. He does all this stuff, but then he falls prey to idols and has all these concubines and wives. And anyway, so just not to belabor that point too much, but King Joash, we can just keep going on in the Old Testament. And the thing I was thinking about, what's missing in the Old Testament is the grace of redemption. They don't have the grace of Christ. They don't have the forgiveness and redemption that comes to us in Christ. It's only Christ that helps us to restore what was possible in the beginning. That's what we hear in his dialogue with the Pharisees. They talk about Moses' decree of divorce, And Jesus says, basically, Moses accommodated you because of your hardness of heart. But in the beginning, it was not so. Man and woman were meant to be together in an indissoluble bond that lasts their whole lives. And essentially, that wasn't possible to live because they didn't have the grace of redemption. But now, with Christ, we do have the grace of redemption. And by his grace, we are able to live out our response to God. So, having laid all that out, coming back to your point, Joe, what happens when we cut Jesus out? Well, we can't do it. Mm-hmm. We can develop certain virtues and we can grow in certain ways, and there's a certain kind of natural humanism, secular humanism, which has some admirable qualities and has some good starting points, but ultimately it's lacking coherence. It's lacking a kind of whole cloth approach because it's missing the theological virtue of charity. Ultimately, what holds everything together is God's love for us, and thus the redemption and the grace of transformation that goes with that, and then our love for God, which is what the virtue of charity is about. And so if we don't, just depending on our human virtues alone, without the grace of Christ, without his virtues, we just can't do it. We just end up, we're like the universe, which is oriented to entropy. It's always falling apart. We're always moving into greater chaos. It's only God, it's only Jesus Christ who reverses that process definitively. And that's where we need him. So, again, there's a value to it, but there's a fundamental flaw in it that plays itself out over time because it starts to find an orientation in money, for example. Why do we want to have a good workplace? Why do we want to have virtuous workers? Well, because it improves the bottom line. It's ultimately going to cycle around to becoming the point of the whole thing, and that's simply not a reason that can sustain our efforts. So, there's a danger there. It's a blessing. Now, someone might be really believe in Jesus and really be doing it for all the right reasons, and is making those things available to non-believers, although with the possibility of sharing with them the faith. And so it's not to say it's all bad, or everything is doomed, but it really can't sustain itself without the Lord.
Yeah, because going through it was one of those things where, kind of as I started out, it makes you better whenever you follow the faith. Mm-hmm. You run better businesses when you're truthful, whenever you're trying to take care of your employees and they want to be there and they're happy. And the best way to do that is basically doing the way that the faith teaches you to do it. And it just gets to me that people go, well, what are the benefits of you going to church? You learn develop these skills and become close to the way Jesus did it. Yes, you're going to get more money out of it because you'll get better at being your manager. Your company will run better. But part of going through that process of learning is that might have been the gold nugget that made you start looking to become a better manager, more profitable, better salesman, whatever. But as you get into it, you realize that that's nothing compared to the processing that you're building up by living the message. And that's the part that I'm trying to get across here. With so much going on out there, that's highlighted by the negative. One of the things that we do here in America is we've ripped things down like crazy. Really, really good at that, especially ripping down people. Not so much so on the rebuilding it. And I think that's part of why I'm drawn to my business. I get to rebuild houses all the time after ripping them down or doing the demo work. And it just seems that for whatever reason or another, that there doesn't seem to be a buildup of this aspect that we'll use what we can as far as having a functional society where people don't lie. They stop at red lights. They're courteous enough to each other, but we're not going to identify the reason and the glue behind it. And it just kind of seems a little fluttered. You know, I that's just throwing it out there as far as how to improve it, and or whether there should be a like I get why government needs to have a separation of religion and state. You don't want to make one law that says everyone has to be one religion, everyone has to be this and that, because that ultimately leads to problems and defeats free will, as we have discussed many times in the past. So I understand that portion of it, and I also understand a company's side that says I don't want to alienate any potential customers by being only promoting one religion and they may not be a part of it, so I don't want to alienate that. So again, getting back to what you're saying, money being a driving force behind it, but I'm looking to see if there's a way that, you know, we can start reintroducing Jesus into America. Long story short. And obviously that's part of this podcast, is why we've been doing this for over a year and trying the goal of it. But I'm just trying to figure out some action steps that all of us can do in our everyday lives to make it happen.
Well, and I think we're inspired by some of the companies that are more explicit about that, right? I mean, everybody knows Chick-fil-A is run by Christians.
Yeah.
Right? You
Yeah.
know, I mean, it's possible to have a business and to, you know, I'm sure that Chick-fil-A doesn't only hire Christians, nor do they require everybody to go to church on Sunday, you know? And that's where, so you use that magical phrase, separation of church and state, which actually doesn't exist anywhere in the Constitution or in the you know, the law of America. But I think that was ultimately, it was used in a kind of small time speech by Thomas Jefferson or something like that. He said something about separation of church and state. Anyway, it's a catchphrase that has fueled the justification of separating the church off into its own sphere, you know, to not have any influence on the state, which is never the point. Actually the founding, the Bill of Rights says that the state will not establish any particular religion, any state religion, nor prevent the establishment of any particular religion. So it's the way that it often does prevent the establishment of religion or the influence of religion is really arguably against the First Amendment. So, but the point is, you know, we have to learn how to be Christian and unabashedly Christian without without disadvantaging others or forcing that on them. So always proposing, never imposing, but we have to at least propose and we have to witness and be ready to admit that we're Christians and these are the values that we live by and this is where we get them from. Why are we afraid to tell people that we're going to pray for them? I mean, it's amazing. My experience is that people are really open to it. You know, we have this fear of rejection and, you know, or that somebody's going to feel imposed upon, or, oh, there are lots of very friendly ways to tell other businesses or whatever. Yeah, you know, I don't work on Sundays because that's something I hold really important, is to keep that day holy for the Lord. Or, God bless you. Thanks for being so honest. You know, I really appreciate your integrity. I'm going to pray for you that things work out for you. You know, like, why are we afraid to say those things? But we've so systematically removed some of those phrases from our vocabulary that they're anxious to, you know, that everybody's going to feel offended by our Christianity, and I just don't think it's true. So I'm always, I don't know, I travel around everywhere in my habit, and I'm wearing my religion on my sleeve, literally. Mm-hmm. So, and I just don't find people being offended. I mean, they're usually interested. You know, I'm sure if I started going after them, and I do like to ask, you know, raise the question sometimes. People will come up to me and, oh, you know, I was sitting in a restaurant and this waitress came up and said, oh, we were wondering what you are. And I said, well, I'm a monk, a Catholic priest. And then I said, what are you? And I used to be Catholic. I'm Catholic. I haven't gone to church. And I said, well, why aren't you going to church? You know, I just like turn it right around. They're interested. I'm interested. Why can't we have a discussion about this? And I didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable, but it's nice to raise those questions from time to time. And sometimes people just stop going because nobody asks. So anyway, there are a lot of ways that we can just get more comfortable in our own skin and slough off this kind of, it's really an anti-religious, especially anti-Christian atmosphere that's being promoted by really the religion of secularism.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of casting God out, of doing business with, that money is the center and the self-exaltation or these, anyway, there's a whole religion of secularism that pushes against and combats against Christianity. So we need to not be defeated by that and offended and affected by that, but just be naturally ourselves and not afraid to promote our values and the reason for them.
Yeah, going off of what you said, two thoughts had come to me. First off, every society I've ever read about that has gone down that route of pushing God away and going for secularism has universally ended in one form of genocide or another. The communists did it like crazy throughout the Soviet Union. The Cubans did it. The Chinese did it. Every single group that did it. Now, they usually use the banner of communism, but even the ones that didn't, everyone who's universally gone to destroy the family, which is their only other way of doing it, destroy the family and become a secular state, has ended in mass murder. And that's true fact. You can look up pretty much every, until you find an example where that didn't happen. I'm pretty sure it's a byproduct of the two. So that was one. And it's the second thing you brought up there was, I guess maybe because of my thoughts of preparing for this one, was Chick-fil-A. I was actually talking to a guy who's got a high school kid looking for his first job. They said, yeah, he's thinking about going into fast food. And I go, well, where do you want him to apply for? Because there's no debate. It's Chick-fil-A. It's by far and away the best run one. And I sat back and thought about it. I was like, yeah, that's not even close once you actually think about it. You might get a particular location here or there of any particular place, but as far as a universal outcome, there's no doubt that the people at the Chick-fil-A are treated better than, on the whole, virtually every other fast food one I can think of. So I bring those together because I think that those are the two opposite extremes that are going off of the conversation here, is that, there is a danger in not bringing up God anymore. And it's also kind of how do you approach that topic? How do you get the conversation going? It's kind of easy at a big milestone event like a wedding. Like, obviously you're in a church, you just got married. That's kind of obvious. We're going to talk about Jesus. But like your run-of-the-mill trip, you're with a couple of guys going to watch a game or something, I have no idea what their habits are in terms of going to church or whatnot. And I, never really brought it up or thought about it. So, I guess that's how to broach that. If it's something you seem, that should be broached.
See, if there's a will, there's a way. It's so easy to come up with ways to just raise the issue somewhat innocuously. I mean, you're watching a game on a Saturday, and you ask the guys, "Do you guys go to church usually on Saturday? You going to church tomorrow?" And people, I find that they've usually made some peace with wherever they are. Yeah, I used to do that. I went to church quite a bit, and I just really haven't been in a while. Now, do you go to church? No, I mean, that's the kind of conversation. It's not like somebody's going to get, flip out and storm off or something like that because you mentioned church, right? I mean, we just have these kind of insane, like, oh my gosh, it's just like this wet blanket's going to fall on the whole atmosphere and everybody's going to feel uncomfortable, and somebody's going to say, yeah, I don't know about that. You got some more dip over there? Do you have a beer? I mean, like, there's no issue. Nobody cares. Nobody's worried about it. But sometimes, you ask a question like that, and it can stir a little conversation. And if you, without being an irritant, you can kind of keep the subject going a little bit. Like, oh, when there a reason you stopped going, or you can just take that opportunity? You've now introduced your own, made your own introduction for it. Yeah, I started slacking off a little bit a couple years ago, and I started up again. It's been great. Me and Teresa, it's really brought us a lot closer. It's been the foundation of our relationship, and you should think about it, right? Now we've just had a great, there's a nice little entree into
Mm-hmm.
that space. So I think there are a lot of easy ways to just raise the issue if we want to. And that's where I think we need to look into our own hearts and say, what are we afraid of? Or why are we not convinced enough? Or, what's holding us back? Do we not feel like that's part of what we are called to do as Christians? We're not really Christian if we're not evangelizing. Every disciple must also be a missionary. This is the clearest message from 2,000 years of Christianity, and it's been amped up in volume, especially in the last 50 years, as we've really turned the church toward a missionary spirit. So we've really got to ask ourselves, how deep is my faith if I'm not raising these conversations, if I'm not raising these questions with people, if I'm not making some effort to share that faith with others?
And yeah, I mean, obviously, going back through the last year of having these recordings, my personality is the kind of wanting stuff done and what are the benefits therein. And that's obviously been something we've tried to discuss a lot about trying to get things accomplished and what can you do and the benefits you get throughout it. And, unfortunately, it's very subtle. It's not very sudden where you can just go, this magical big change has happened. And it's not. And I guess part of it is because I don't think I fully understand it. I'm going through it. I can tell that my life as a whole is better than it was prior. And I can feel it. But there's not, like the sacraments obviously are big mileposts. But as far as the closest of any other individual relationship, I don't know how to say that there's this big thing that you can just tell. And I don't even know if I'm articulating this well or right. It feels like a couple of jumbled thoughts that I'm trying to put together here. And just, there's such an overcoming of a calmness that as you start getting closer to God, and there's so many times I've been in a church where something was bothering me a lot for a while and I just couldn't figure it out, and then in the stillness of a mass, maybe the walking over between the first and second reading or something like that, like a thought will just pop in my head and it'll just be the solution that I was looking for that wasn't coming along.
Mm-hmm.
And almost to the point now where I'm expecting it. And I guess that's why you say you trust, Jesus, I trust in you, because it turns worrying down to a degree that is so massive. And it also gave me another thought, which is kind of a one-off aside that I don't think would have been long enough for an entire cast. But it was just one question. If there wasn't God, why would we have guilt? Because inherently, at least in myself, I only feel guilt when I know I did something that was wrong and as a result of sin. And I don't think that if you lived in a world where there was no God, that you'd have guilt. It would just be a power struggle to get whatever you want. And that's a thought I had. I know that kind of a little random there, but that's just a thought I had.
Yeah, well, it's one of the ways that we can understand the existence of God, which is not something that requires faith. To believe in the existence of God is something that's accessible to our reason alone. And one of the the directions we can take is that question of good and evil. Why do we have a sense of good and evil? Why do we have a sense that there's a right and wrong? How can there be morals and ethics if there isn't any source of those morals and ethics? And we can look at the civilizations. I mean, every human civilization has had the same code of morals and ethics. I mean, how is that possible? That's not just influence. When we find the people, the Aborigines in Papua New Guinea, and find that they have the same code of ethics that everybody else has had, or you compare the Chinese to the Greco-Roman, the East to the West, the whatever, there's been a consistency in all of that. Essentially, the Ten Commandments, the Code of Hammurabi, a sense of justice, of equality. So, yeah, where does all that come from? I mean, there must be something that exists prior to us. It's not just random. So now, in terms of discovering the God of Jesus Christ and the Trinity, well, there's an additional piece to that. I mean, there's a revelation that has to be trusted and received through the virtue of faith. So that takes us another step forward, builds on that foundation, that ethical foundation. But you're right, the human psychological response of guilt to doing what is wrong is a one witness. It's the witness of our conscience that there's a law greater than ourselves. We're not the lawmaker. We are the law receiver and the law follower. We're not the lawmaker. And so guilt testifies to the existence of a lawmaker, a law greater than ourselves. And that points to divine being.
That's beautiful. So thank you for answering my question, first off. Because that, like I said, that was something that had come into me during church about trying to figure it out. Because, I do think that part of the reason that people would stop going is because they're losing that sense of why to go and why it is important. And I wanted to take that. I appreciate you taking today's time to try to inject about why it's important to bring it back into the rest of our lives daily. So with that being said, Father, thank you for doing today's cast. I thank everyone out there for listening. Please continue to follow us on Twitter at FatherAndJoe. And please give us the reviews that you have been. We're getting big jumps every time you guys give us a review on each of your individual subscription services. So thank you guys very much, and we'll be with you next week.